Regarding the lawyers, we're paying you and Mr. Winslow right now, correct?
The funds to pay me are not coming out of the plan, but they are funds that I've received from Roger Williams. And let me explain that, because this is a very sensitive question. So the one thing that was stated right out at the beginning by St. Joe's is that the receiver and the receiver's fees, costs, and expenses will not be paid from plan assets, meaning the money that is being held right now by the plan, the $86 million, that is not getting depleted at all to pay the fees, costs, and expenses of this proceeding. That said, there are monies that are in the what I'll call the old St. Joseph's and the old Roger Williams for their wind-down efforts. So when a hospital is sold the way Roger Williams and St. Joe's were, certain things are left behind and certain wind-down efforts are required under state law, and that costs money to do that. So certain assets were left behind. Those monies, once those entities are wound down, would ultimately, according to a Cypre order, it's an order entered by the court, would ultimately flow into the plan. Those are the monies right now that are being used to compensate me, my fees and expenses, Mr. Wistow's fees and expenses. I will say, with regard to Mr. Wistow, his engagement is an hourly fee at the investigatory stage, and then he moves to a contingency fee platform. So his hourly fees will stop once he's determined and made a decision and reported to me who can and can't be sued, or who we think we can sue. Once that happens, the first time we file a lawsuit, then Mr. Wistow's time is based on a contingency basis, not hourly. Mine, unfortunately, is hourly all the way through.
About how long do you think this money will last that they have at Roger Williams?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know how long that'll last. And the reason why is because that money is a little bit of a moving target. Similar to the pension, they've invested some of the monies that they have because they don't need cash immediately available for wind-down efforts. So their hope is that by investing it, they will earn interest income on those investments, investment income, and that will increase the pile of money. They also have other assets that they can liquidate. I don't know for certain. What I've been told, and it was reported in Go Local, is that St. Joe's has approximately $1.5 million, somewhere between 1.5 and 2, and Roger Williams has somewhere in the vicinity of $4 to $5 million. Those monies, as I stated, are what is being used to pay my fees, costs, and expenses, but also the wind-down efforts of those entities. And the only thing I have any insight into is what I'm doing with regard to this plan. I don't know where the wind-down efforts are or how much they've anticipated they will need to wind down 100%. I have asked that question for them to give me a budget so I have an understanding. Partially the reason I want a budget is because I want to know. The other reason is, for example, if they have, let's say there's $6 million and they say we anticipate that we're going to need $3 million to wind down efforts, then my position would be, okay, well then you don't need 6. Give me the 6 and I can put it into this plan and help the plan out a little bit. I'm not sure if I'll be successful in doing that because it'll be an estimate and a guess, but just so you're aware, that's kind of my mindset, is I'd like to get as much money as I can to come into this plan so that the 85 million becomes 88 or 92 or 95 or something like that. The more money I can collect, the less of a cut I have to make, and the better off we're all going to be on that.
Okay, I have another question. The third group, they're getting a lawyer, and say they get a lawyer now, he needs to be compensated. He will be compensated by everybody, correct?
Only if the court approves it. So if an same way, let's just say, for example, you decide you want to hire your own personal attorney to handle this, to work in this case. Your attorney could ask the court to have the fees and expenses of your attorney paid by the plan, by the estate. It's up to the court to determine whether or not that's appropriate. The standard is generally, it's the same standard used in bankruptcy cases, which is the attorney bringing value to the proceeding as a whole? And the court will make that decision if and when a petition is filed. I'm certain that the court will ask me to weigh in on what I believe, and then the court will make a decision based on everybody who weighs in. And I won't be the only one that can weigh in. I'm just one person I assume the court's going to want to hear from, but anybody would have the ability to weigh in and explain why they are in agreement with what's being proposed or in disagreement with what's being proposed.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So you mentioned 2 other lawyers earlier, and that they're forming groups, or they're not forming them, but people are forming with those lawyers. How do we know what they represent? I know about the one group, St. Joseph, from Facebook, but we don't know what these other 2, we haven't heard from them. We have received nothing.
Correct. And to be completely honest with you, I've spoken to the attorney, but they have not yet, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, defined their philosophy or who they are. It's my understanding that they are retirees who are eligible to receive benefits, but for one reason or another have not yet elected to receive those benefits. But that's an unofficial description of who that group is. I don't know what they're looking for in terms of an adjustment on benefits, and I don't even know if what I just told you is 100% accurate.
So
until they define themselves.
How do we find out?
I'll have to ask them to either give me something to either post or mail out to you, or they're going to have to reach out in some way, shape, or form, same way as the other group did, to let everybody know. Because they're being formed independently, until I'm told that the group is formed and I'm told what the group stands for as a group, I have no way of knowing what their position is.
Now, at the last meeting, you had mentioned that if we do form a group, this one group, say, is formed, that you would mail out mailings to the 2,700 people.
Yep.
Apparently, that wasn't done. Is there a reason?
The part of the reason why that wasn't done with this group, I did receive some information from the one group, St. Joseph. There was a letter which I believe they passed out today. And the one thing that I do need to be cautious about in the position that I stand is either actually advocating or being perceived to advocate on behalf of one group. The letter that you received, while I don't see anything wrong with the letter, there were some statements in that letter that I couldn't, as the receiver, embrace or advocate for. So I was actually going to be going back to that group and asking them to tweak the letter. Instead, they came here tonight with a letter, which is probably a much more efficient way to do it.
Yeah, but, I mean, how many people do you think are here?
Tonight, I'd say maybe about 250. No, and that doesn't mean that I won't provide something at a later date. But it's either going to have to do one of 2 things. Either I'm going to have to scrub it to make sure that it doesn't say anything inaccurate or that I can't say, or I'm going to have to make sure that a very, very clear letter, which is advising people that I'm providing this for informational purposes only and that it does not represent the position of the court or the receiver with regard to this group. I'm not advocating for the group or anything like that.
Because again, what's happening is now there are 3 lawyers in that middle group. And I thought what we were trying to do was cut down on the legal fees. But if the more lawyers that are in there, the less money will be in the end for us. So is there some way you can mail out something to let the 2,700 people know what their options are. If they're not in the union, if they're not with Arlene, what are our options? Because there's only 600 people on the Facebook page that I got going.
Yep.
This other offshoot only has like 72 people in it so far. But those other two lawyers that you say are involved.
There's only one. There are two groups that have been formed.
Okay.
Or there's one group that's been formed, which is the group you just heard from, and then there's another group where I've spoken to them, but I don't know how they define themselves as of yet.
Well, I feel that the 2,700 people need information on where they can go if they're not in Arlene or the union. We need to get that word out to 2,700 people. Or unless you can specifically say it's only 1,900.
I absolutely agree. The problem is I can't provide information till it's provided to me. So there's the one group, literally one group, St. Joseph, that has been formed is the only group that I've been officially advised exists. And I think John and Jeff, about 35 members? 70, okay. Okay. He said the steering committee has 32 members and the committee itself is up to approximately 70 right now?
The group is up to 70 right now.
Okay.
But we just started receiving the
Right. You hope to grow beyond 70. But that's the only group that I'm aware of right now, other than Arlene and the union, that I can tell you has officially organized.
Okay.
Why does who need 3 groups? Well, the fact of the matter is that anybody who believes that they want or need representation has the right to do that. And if people have a similar mindset in what they'd like to achieve or what they'd like to see happen, they have the right, just like somebody who doesn't want to engage a lawyer doesn't have to, a group can get together. There are a lot of people involved in this plan. There are 2,729. It's difficult for a group that large to work as one and to have a like-minded philosophy. I'm not saying that legal counsel is necessary. I'm not saying it's not necessary. But I do believe, because I can't do it, I believe that the members need to facilitate kind of understanding where they all have like-mindedness.
Hi. I heard you mention that, as far as you're concerned, if for the 2,000 group, the people in the middle, that it sounds like it's a foregone conclusion that it would be the equal downsizing of each, no matter what group you're in. And that's what this group 1 is saying also. Were there any other options put forward, or did this is the way it's going to be, and that's that? Because why join group 1 if they've got the same intention as what you're saying for the group? You see what I mean?
I do see what you're saying, although I have not adopted any position yet with regard to adjustments.
Oh, I thought that it sounded like you had.
No,
Okay.
I'm saying that group, what the philosophy they have is that they would like to see whatever cut is made, let's call it 10%, that it's 10% across the board. That's an option that's similar to what St. Joe's, the old St. Joe's, suggested in their papers. I'm not saying that isn't what potentially could be presented to the court in February, but at this point, there is no decision that's been made. Just that group is saying that that's what they want. We do know that Arlene Violet's group, for example, has said, based on the circumstances of her group, that she doesn't want any of them cut at all. So we've got 2 differing philosophies right there, and the union has a differing view on it as well. So those are the types of discussions we'll be having with this advisory group as to other options that might be out there, and then kind of narrowing it down to 4, 5, 6, 7, and then trying to figure out what may be the best.
Because I'm just wondering, this is the first I'd heard of the group 1 tonight, that if for example, if I sign up for this and then later on down the pike, you and the advisory committee come up with some idea that's better for everybody, then what? Are we, because we signed into this, we're stuck with that, or
No,
You know what I mean?
and let me make it clear that
no other options
let's
have been really come to the fore yet?
right, and let's just say, just for purposes of our discussion right now, that there are 10 groups that form, and that every single one of those groups has a different idea about what should be done. Ultimately, the court, based on my recommendation, is going to decide one result. So it doesn't matter if you're in group 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. What the judge ultimately decides is going to be what ends up happening, at least initially. There's always going to be change. This is a fluid situation. So take one group, St. Joseph. They want an across-the-board cut. If, hypothetically speaking, I go into court in February and I say that graduated cuts are the best way to go, and here's how I present it, and the judge approves that. That's what everybody is going to have to live with at that time, whether or not they wanted it or not. My hope is that I'll sit down with the group and we'll be able to come to a consensus. But under my scenario, which is possible, everybody who sits at the table comes with an idea and does not deviate from that idea. And then it's left for me to come with what I think is the most equitable, and hope that the judge either comes up with a better idea than me or adopts the one that he thinks is most equitable. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Bruce Campbell. I was risk manager, for those who don't know me, for about 20 years. And I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
We seem to have lost track of the fact that we were forming what I thought were 4 advisory groups. Is that still on the table?
There's one advisory committee.
All right.
That advisory committee is going to be staffed with a combination, because I've got some groups and a large number who don't want or haven't joined a group. That advisory committee is going to be staffed with members of the groups that have been formed, as well as, that was the point of my survey, was to pull those who aren't in any type of a group or haven't organized and bring them into the fold as well.
So we're not really having the group that's already collecting, those who are eligible, not collecting, and so on. But those are the advisory groups you wanted to set up originally, is that correct? For those 4 groups in general. Now, Group 1 may have a variety of interests.
Yes.
Group 2 may say it should be graduated. One of the problems is with these different groups is we will have to negotiate among ourselves. I'm sure some groups will want a graduated amount, and others will not want to change.
You mean within the smaller groups?
Within the smaller and the larger groups. There's going to be a diversity of interests.
My hope and my expectation is that anybody who sits on the advisory committee, if you are a member of a group, that you are there and you are representing, at the very least, the interests of your group. And I have to rely on the fact that what is being stated by that member of the advisory committee is the consensus. Maybe not majority, maybe not unanimous, but the majority of the group that they represent. And I expect that everybody who sits on that committee will, obviously everybody walks into the room with their own subjective reasons for being there and their own thoughts on what would be best for them. But that group's purpose is to try to identify on an objective level what might be best for everybody here as equitably as possible. Even if it may not be exactly what's best for you personally, it's what might work for the group as a whole.
All right, so you could be on one group and recognize the fact that you want everyone to get the same percentage, but be willing to negotiate if that is necessary.
Correct. Correct.
My other question is the numbers you threw around for the deficit.
Yep.
And the maximum number I heard was $125 million based on an extremely conservative investment factor.
Yes.
That isn't necessarily the amount you're going to recommend, is it?
The amount I'm going, well, that's a number of what would I need to pay everybody 100% over the life of this plan.
That seems extremely conservative. And the meaning of that is we went from being 60% funded, now we're about 40% funded.
Well,
Are we not? In other words, we had 86 million.
Right.
Now you're increasing the deficit by 120, that's 200 million. So 86 million is roughly 40% of 200 million.
Yes. I'm assuming you're making reference to the 90% number that was thrown out in 2014.
No, the number you mentioned that we need is 125 million.
Yeah.
If we have 86 million, that means, do we need 125 or do we need 200? Are you increasing the deficit to 125?
I'm not increasing it.
No, I mean, but are you recommending that number?
That's a difficult question because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to collect as much money as I can. To be completely frank with everybody in this room and anybody who may ultimately watch this, it is, although a hope of mine, it is highly unlikely that I'm going to be able to recover even a fraction of what is needed to pay everybody out 100%. If I'm able to collect $40 million, that's not going to get everybody paid 100%. So the number is merely to put into context how deeply harmed this pension plan has been over the years because of the circumstances surrounding it, and each one of you have been harmed as a result. Because in order for you to receive what you thought you were being promised, I would need to have somebody write me a check of, if you look at what St. Joe's did, $43 million, or if you look at what I've said, about $100 to $125 million. And that assumes I'm still investing the money and I'm still receiving investment returns on it.
Yeah.
It's highly unlikely we're going to get there.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that the number may be a little too conservative, which will result in an immediate greater reduction than would have otherwise occurred had the number been lower.
Well, I will tell you that the whole reason, one of the reasons why I did not like what St. Joe's proposed when they filed their petition is because that, without actually saying it, what they were really proposing was a one-time cut today going on for the next 40 to 50 years and assuming that the market would return 7.75%. I don't think that that is an appropriate way to go about it. I also don't think it's a realistic way to go about it. I am looking at this as a very fluid situation. I've spoken to the judge on many occasions, and the judge and I are both like-minded in that, let's say we go in, call it February 15th, and we adjust the benefits down. Let's say I do, say, 40% across the board down. But then a month later, we're able to settle with an entity that we decide we can sue, and that we are able to receive $20 million into the plan a month later. That would automatically allow me to go in and reevaluate the cut and possibly reduce the cut up that next month, and so on and so forth. The same thing, and I spoke to some people at the last meeting afterwards. We've had about 8-9 years of good performance in the market. As everybody knows, the market's cyclical. We are due at some point for some type of a correction. I don't know how big of a correction, I don't know when, but we're due for it. And if I cut benefits, let's say on February 15th, I say, let's do 15%, Judge, across the board, and the judge agrees with it and everybody agrees with it, and then we have a huge market correction that drops the assets substantially, I'm going to have to go back in a month and say 15% isn't enough, we need to go a little bit deeper. So it's a very fluid situation that is not going to be a one-time adjustment. I'm going to be constantly monitoring what we are getting for cash in, what the market is doing, who's applying for benefits and how much of the payout's going to be, so on and so forth.
That seems a little more reasonable, and if they can affect the adjustments. The other question, now that the deficit is much, much larger than originally indicated, the fact that it was stated we're 90% funded almost borders on misrepresentation. In other words, how could one have possibly have said that in view of what you're telling us now?
Well, I'm going to try to, because I try to stay away from that 90% figure as much as I can, because it's very, very misleading.
Yes.
I'm going to give you an example that I think will hopefully explain the relevance of that number to this plan and how it really has no relevance to this plan going forward. It's only retroactive. If I take a 30-year mortgage out with a bank, and in year 2 I fail to make 12 payments, I don't make any payment January to December, the bank calls me up and they say, Stephen, you're in default on your mortgage, you owe us 12 payments. And I have a wealthy relative who passes and leaves me enough money where I can make 10 of those 12 payments. And the bank says, okay, if you can make 10 out of those 12, you will be 90% there to covering your deficiency. That does not mean that I don't have another 28 years to pay the mortgage going forward. It just means as of that day, I had a hole, and I filled that hole up, and I'm 90% there of filling my old deficit up. I still have to pay the 2 months that my wealthy dead relative wasn't able to pay me to do, and I've got to pay month 25 and 26 and 35 and 45 and 55. So that 90% is exactly that situation. The plan had not been funded properly up till 2014. And the $14 million that went in 2014 cured the amount that should have been put in the prior years, 90%. That going forward, it has no bearing. And I made a statement, I don't know if it actually got reported, that this plan would still be here if in June in 2014, they said, we're going to put in $28 million. And that puts the plan at 125% funding as of June 2014. 125% funding as of that day, with $10 million leaving every year for benefits on average, an investment income of approximately 6 to 7%, the plan is going to fail. It's just, would it fail in 15 years or would it fail in 25 years? So that's why that number 90% it's a misleading number to think of it in terms of going forward into the future. It really only relates to the past.
No, I understand that, but the point I was trying to make is that the parties that were involved in the decision, including the Attorney General, in looking at those numbers, how could they miss the fact that it was not nearly adequately funded to take care of the needs of all the pensioners in the ensuing years, which I feel strengthens our potential for a liability claim and successful litigation.
That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, is who knew what and when. And the statement was made at the hearing on Wednesday is either, there are two scenarios that I think exist. Either the Attorney General didn't understand that 90% number and didn't understand what the funding requirements of the plan were, or people did know and they ignored it. As far as I'm concerned, those are really the only two options. We stated that to the court on Wednesday of last week, and our job is to figure out which one of those, or if there's a third option that we didn't consider. But until I have the documents from everybody, I'm not going to be able to answer that question, which is why I so desperately need those documents.
I'm looking forward to that again. Thank you. And one other last question. The advisory committees, will those be appointed tonight or mentioned?
Not tonight. I'm actually, because everything was received on Friday, I actually did receive just a couple that were sent on Friday but didn't get to me in the mail until today. I'm going to be making a decision on the staffing of that committee within the next 48 hours. I'm going to advise those people, but everybody, through a notice of what that advisory committee is, and it is my hope that we're going to have our first meeting next week. Based on my discussions with Attorney Violet in Senville and the attorneys for the union and a couple of people I have spoken to, I haven't decided, but the meeting is either going to be first thing in the morning or at the end of the day, say like 6:30 at night. And like I said, the first meeting will be next week, and then as we go, we'll decide how frequent they need to be. The more we can get done at the meetings that we have, the less frequent we have to meet, but February is not far away.
Thank you.
Thank you.